No, I'm gutted that Jeremy Carl's been axed.
Are you? Why?
Yeah, because I had a routine every morning. I would get up at about 9:20, I would get my clothes on, get the breakfast, put RTV on, and have an hour of unbridled comedy with Jeremy Carl. I mean, I don't want to watch David Dickinson talking about antiques.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, you won't be able to do that anymore. You just have to listen to my show on Talk Radio instead.
I mean... Well,
we'll try and keep you amused if we can, Alan. But thanks very much indeed. Alan's outraged. He doesn't get to watch Jeremy Kyle anymore, and there'll be a lot of people like that because it was a big watched and a big audience for that particular slot. Hugh's in Reigate. Hello, Hugh.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Very well, sir. What would you like to say?
Well, I think this reality TV thing is really interesting because the only reason there is so much of it and shows like the Car Show exists is to keep people watch it. And advertisers pay to put their products in the middle of the programme.
Yeah.
So clearly the only reason ITV would cancel it is because they've had concern expressed by the people that that pay for those adverts.
Yes. Well, I mean, people are saying things like, well, just because it's popular doesn't mean it's good, bizarrely. But I mean, they've always said things like that, haven't they?
Well, I was saying to Cornelius on the phone when I rang up, first of all, I mean, there was a time when Page 3 girls sold newspapers. These things have a shelf life and public opinion changes. But,
do you think that's where we are with the Jeremy Kyle show then?
Well, I suspect so, because we've become very good at moral outrage, haven't we?
Yes, but when was the last time you heard somebody saying, oh, Jeremy Kyle, that's a bit sort of 1990, shouldn't we take it off the air?
No, never. I mean,
nobody did.
But that's the disconnect between the people and the people that run things, if you ask me.
Yes.
I mean, I hate to mention the Brexit word, but I mean, it's the same thing that's going on in politics now. People watch things like The X Factor, as you mentioned earlier, and Strictly, and they like the sort of faux drama of the contestants and all that sort of thing. I mean, Strictly may not be controversial, but it always seems to have a love triangle somewhere in the middle of an episode to get people to watch it. And, we're being played and manipulated by what is actually, for the broadcasters, fairly cheap TV.
Well, that's right. And they know, it's not like they don't know what they're doing. This is why I think that I'm glad to see that they're going to keep Jeremy Kyle on and give him some other show, because it would be very unfortunate and unfair, I think, on him, surrounded as he is by executives and board members of ITV and the production staff and producers and all of that, and he's the one that takes the fall.
Oh, well, look, there'll be a lot of people at ITV today cursing the fact that it's been cancelled.
Yeah, of course.
But
quite a lot of advertisers as well, I would imagine.
Well, yes, but I mean, I can't believe in a commercial world that ITV wouldn't have checked with, I don't know whether the show has a sponsor or not, because I don't watch it. I mean, I have watched it occasionally.
I mean, funnily enough, I have it on, or I did have it on in the studio here, because we've got a few TV screens, and one's on ITV. So I've watched Jeremy Kyle in silence, without any sound, probably for about a year and a half. I don't know whether that's had any effect on me.
So far,
none, no, but you're right, Hugh, thanks very much indeed for your call. Let's talk to Marilyn, who's in Watford. Hello, Marilyn.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, Marilyn. What do you want to say?
One of the things for me, I think it's a bigger conversation. It's always sad when someone takes their own life, and I say that from my own perspective as someone who contemplated suicide very seriously, and then a few years later worked as a Samaritan's volunteer, answering the phone, seeing visitors, and for the past 18 years coaching people in this space.
Okay.
And for me, suicide is such a big issue, and there's often more than one touch point. It's rarely the last thing you did that is the thing that makes you do it, because when I contemplated it, it was because a partner had an affair and got someone pregnant, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. So if I had taken my life then, my partner probably would have felt really guilty. Yeah. But actually, it was probably because I was sexually abused as a child when I was 7. Do you know what I mean? So just looking at the last thing that happened can be quite a narrow view. And what I would always hope when suicide comes into the wider conversation, I really hope that it sparks a discussion about the stigma that it still exists within mental health, particularly as far as men are concerned.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I mean, there are many aspects to this story, and I'm not going to trivialise what happened at all, and certainly not going to trivialise the effect that Jeremy Kyle's show may have had on the man who took his own life. But he was a man who suffered from depression. He went to his GP with arthritis, and he was given morphine. Now, I mean, I don't know what the efficacy is of that kind of thing, but it seems to me that if you've got a risk assessment and you do it on a patient who may or may not be at risk of suicide, you don't give them morphine, do you?
Well, I'm not a medical practitioner, not a doctor, and because my line of work is people often come to see me when the traditional things have not worked.
Yeah.
And that even down to taking antidepressants, and they'll come to see me to find a more natural way to do that. And I have to say that in the last 18 years I've been in practice, all of my clients are still happy and healthy and alive and thriving.
Good for you.
So I know there's another way to be.
Yeah.
But for me, I really, really, really hope that because, I started this year with going to the funeral of a Facebook contact of mine who was, if you thought of somebody who was the most motivational, happy person you could think of, it would have been that man, and we were all sat at his funeral in January this year.
Yeah.
So for me, I really hope it opens up a conversation where people talk about how they're feeling and seek help.
No, I think you're absolutely right. But I suppose if you were to be pragmatic about it, Marilyn, which you obviously are very pragmatic about many things, if the shutting down of the Jeremy Kyle show prevents this from happening ever again, because it's not that kind of exploitative TV which is very helpful to people, then probably that's a good thing anyway, perhaps?
I don't know. Will it really shut down? I mean, how many TV channels have we got now? I would say probably 500.
Several dozen, yeah.
Sit on my TV.
Yeah.
And people have mentioned it already this morning about the Love Island thing, where 2 contestants within the space of 12 months have committed suicide. Again, you can't just make a direct correlation between Love Island and they commit suicide. Right. However, there probably is some relationship there in terms of what it throws you into and how it opens up your life to the public, and everyone has an opinion. So I don't know it's necessarily, because the way I would see this, when they talk about don't put the cart before the horse and all that sort of stuff, Jeremy Kyle was the last touch point, potentially for this person, but there would have been a lot of things happening in that person's life before they ended up on that show.
Sure.
So taking the show off is almost like pulling up the grass, pulling up the weeds, but not actually addressing what's at the root.
No, exactly. And by his own admission, I think he went on the show hoping that it was going to solve the problems that he had. And clearly that didn't happen. But Marilyn, very thoughtful of you to call. Thank you so much for telling us about your personal story as well. Here's a text from Terry, who's texted into 87222. One thing you do not seem to be reporting is that the fiancé of the man that committed suicide after appearing on the Jeremy Kyle show has publicly said that the aftercare he received after appearing on the show was excellent and outstanding. I haven't seen that, Terry, but if you say that's what's being reported, then I'll take your word for it. Let's talk to Paddy, who's in Suffolk. Hello, Paddy.
Hiya, Mike.
How you doing?
I'm very well, mate. The sunny day.
Beautiful day.
I've never liked that show, not ever.
No. Well, lots of people didn't like it. Lots of people did.
Well, I think what we've seen with this death is the tip of the iceberg. I would say quite a high proportion of the people who go on that show feel worse about themselves
afterwards.
Yeah. And a high proportion of the people who watch the show feel a lot better about themselves. That's probably why they watch it.
Possibly so. Maybe that's why they do it, because they feel more superior to the people who are on it. Also, I mean, let's not forget, many of the people who did go on the show, and you can say that they were vulnerable, taken advantage of, whatever, were presumably paid to do so. So that some of them did it for the money.
Yes, but generally, I hate to say it, the sort of low IQ people, the sort of Waynetta and Waynetta slobs of the world.
Well, that's general. That would be a generalisation that most people would probably agree with, I guess.
Yes, but why is people surprised that someone is dead now? Because other shows, like the Jerry Springer show, people have committed murder after that show.
I mean, this is why the whole idea of reality television, I think, is now being questioned, Paddy, because you'd have to say there are other shows that would have to operate differently now than they have done up until this moment. Even things like Britain's Got Talent and the X Factor and the early stages of those shows where they have people who are not very good at what they do, but they get put on the stage and filmed because it's funny.
Yes, and even going away back those sort of candid camera shows where they throw someone's car into the well, they don't really throw the car into the canal. They get a mock-up of the car and throw it in. So those people that they used to do all these pranks to, they've had to suffer exactly what they would have suffered.
Well, public humiliation. Yeah, I mean, public humiliation is not something that a lot of people can handle. It's true.
Linda, if I could start with you. I mean, this is an absolute terrible tragedy that anyone takes their own life, regardless of the circumstances. But is it fair to blame this TV show? I mean, the show hadn't actually aired. It was just he was being confronted in the studio, obviously an audience of complete strangers. But if this man chose to go on the show, people are paid. They put up in a hotel room. They get new clothing travelling allowance and the like for the show. He chose to go on the show. If he was exposed as a perhaps it was the case that actually, it was his own choices that led him to this terrible, terrible outcome. And it's a bit unfair to blame TV producers. What do you think?
It's obviously, this is like when you ask whatever happens, it's multifactorial. There's a lot of different factors. I think the key here is there something the TV studio, the production company could have done to ensure that, given the nature of the show, right, given the fact that you're going to be talking about difficult issues that are going to have ramifications for your life, if everything was done to ensure that they had support. So I think one of the big questions that's going to come out, and it's not just this, we've had this with Love Island, is the aftercare that these people receive. Look, I did the first season of Big Brother. I was a psychologist on that 20 years ago. I was on screen. I wasn't off screen. But I remember even then, there was real discussions around making sure that people were vetted, that they were, cared for after. And I think what's happened over the years is that we've just gotten so used to this. You've had the Jerry Springers, you've had, different iterations of these shows, and it's just become more and more extreme. The reason it's become more and more extreme is because we get used to seeing something, we get bored with it, so it needs to become. And I wonder if one of the things that happened with that is just this assumption that people know what it'll feel like. People know if these shows have been on, they know what it'll be, and it'll be fine. And I think what this goes to show is that what people expect they'll feel like is not necessarily the case. So maybe, given the fact that there's varying degrees of vulnerability in terms of people that go on, we need to make sure that they're okay and cared for after.
How do you vet someone to find out what they're like? I often think, there are people who are obviously very vulnerable and fragile, and obviously that is, again, bear baiting for human beings. But there are also people who come across, as very strong, who could find this far more troubling than they or anyone else would expect. How do you vet and psychologically profile someone to know who can cope with it and who can't?
Well, you'd look at the previous history of mental health issues. You'd look at the reasons why they want to go on. You'd look at any personality factors that would make them more vulnerable to these things. So any sort of anxiety disorders or mood disorders they'd been on. I think you'd also work very hard to dissuade them, prepare them, and look at what the reason is. If I'm going on because is it because I want to be famous forever? Is it because I want to make some money? Am I going on because I think this is the only way something will happen? You need to kind of look at history, you need to look at predisposition, and you need to look at the reasons why, the motivation for going on. And then beyond that, I think it's very much about, giving them the absolute, understanding of what it means, means that once something is out there. It's kind of what we do, we kind of think of the internet now. What do we tell kids? Once it's out there, it's out there forever. You have to live with it.
That's the reality, isn't it? It's very different from maybe people in the local pub knowing, as opposed to everyone knowing. Toby Earle, you're a TV critic. This show has been going for a long time. It's been criticised pretty much since word go as exploitative and tacky. And it's pretty basic, isn't it? But yet we do all love a gossip, and we quite like seeing people who we think, frankly, are sort of a bit ghastly. We're going, oh, good Lord, these horrible, tacky people doing these horrible, tacky things, having affairs with each other's ex-partners and mothers and lovers and goodness knows what. It's a tangled web. But often we talk about the damage that is done to people is done when a show airs. This show hadn't even aired yet.
Yeah, how could they show a program which has resulted in the death of one of their guests? I mean, I don't think there's anything what else could they have done? They've taken an empathetic decision, and the right one, in order to spare his family any further pain. There's nothing else that could have been done, and the fact that they've removed all episodes from the streaming service as well shows they are very keen to try and sort of move away from further sort of speculation.
Controversy. But I predict a string of people who've been on Jeremy Kyle now doing interviews about how it ruined their life. That's my next
that's already happened. I mean, there are already stories out there. There have been court cases. I mean, 2 years into the show, there was a court case involving someone who had butted another guest on the show. I mean, there has been this atmosphere, provocative atmosphere from the get-go. And like Linda says, I mean, this is born out of the States. These confrontational shows were born out of the States to the era of Jerry Springer. By 2019, you would think that we had moved on a spot to understand more about how people may not necessarily be prepared for this, how the mental health issues surrounding taking part in such programs. Not everyone is prepared to go on these. Not everyone is prepared for the long tail of the ramifications Ireland are taking part in such a programme.
Yeah. And also this show, again, not just everyone seeing it, everyone talking about it, it being on, on catch up, people, it may be being repeated years later, and some of the stuff that comes out is so tacky. And as Linda was saying, it gets more and more extreme because we no longer want "I had an affair." That's not good enough. We want it much more extreme than that. But this is not the first woe this year for Love Island. Of course, we've also seen the deaths at their own hands, we believe, of 2 contestants on ITV2's Love Island. Now, the thing about those guests, those reality TV contestants, is it wasn't. We understand what happened to them on air, or the way they were portrayed on air. It was for them. It was perhaps the lack of aftercare and the pressure of suddenly being very famous, having everyone know all about you, and actually the existence after Love Island that perhaps was the problem. Whereas in the case of Jeremy Kyle, it's believed that it was what actually happened on air. But can we hold TV companies responsible if they do the vetting, if they do the aftercare, if again this is in place, a big if? Can we be responsible for them allowing people who are grown adults to make the decision to air their dirty laundry or put their lives on air, given that people put their dirty laundry on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and everything every single day?
Well, there's a huge difference between people sharing sort of items or snippets about their life on social media, where they don't probably have something in the region of 1 million people viewing and observing it, to going on national television, and like you've already said, having that preserved digitally, both online and on tape, if you like, for maybe repeats in the future. The duty of care is of enormous importance. Not everyone who takes part or wishes to take part may be in the right frame of mind. They may be emotionally vulnerable. They may be vulnerable and unable to fully process what it is that they're getting themselves involved in. I mean, there is a huge responsibility on these programs to make sure those individuals who participate are in the right frame of mind and are fully cognizant of what it is that they're letting themselves in for.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, isn't it? People not really understanding it. And Dr. Linda Papadopoulos, this is the issue, isn't it? A lot of people, they look at their magazines or online, they look at TV shows and go, oh, that would be fun, or that would be a laugh, or in the case of, say, Jeremy Kyle, I can get my own back, or in the case of Love Island, great, I can be a star and I could be wearing designer clothes and having my photo taken, and it's all perfect. And of course, we know it's not all perfect. It's not a great life. Even the people who look like they're having a perfect life aren't having a perfect life. But certainly in the case of Jeremy Kyle, I mean, you'd think of all the shows, people would be able to see the downside very obviously just by watching the show and judging how they are judging those people. But in this particular story, we don't know everything about this story and what has happened. And obviously there will be an inquest, and then we will find out more detail. But in terms of what care can be given to people before and after, what sort of thing do you think could help prevent these tragic losses of life?
Look, I think it's like any industry, right? So you got to kind of see in terms of responsibility. In a way, these are, maybe they're not employees, but they're contracted, right, for a certain period of time. So in the same way that if someone comes to your radio studio, there's a big exit sign so they know where to get out if there's a fire. There's a first aid person in case someone gets hurt. It's not dissimilar to that. And the question is, what are the potential implications? These are people's lives, as Toby says, that are laid bare for all to see in terms of millions of people. Beyond that, we need to also understand the scripted nature of reality TV, right? All of these shows, and we know what, so from a psychological perspective, the brain is primed to be much more interested in conflict and anxiety-evoking responses, which is why precisely on Facebook, the stories that get people spend most time, on the scaremongering stories, on the sensationalism. Of course they do. Anyone in media knows that that's what sells. So it's not like, there's no vested interest in when people are on this show to not rile them up, to not turn them into these binary black or white characters. I'm good, I'm bad, I'm evil, I'm an angel. And because of that, we're not just talking about telling a story. We're talking about inciting a situation, raising emotions. And we know that this is done across, the vast majority of so-called reality TV these days. Because of that, measures do absolutely need to be taken. So yes, there's the before care and the aftercare, but maybe there's something about the sincerity of how, so if you're sitting behind stage and I'm going, oh my God, Toby's done something really awful to you, Julian. Toby's going to come out now, Julian. Wait when he comes out, because that's how this is how it works. So there's got to be, I think, a much more holistic way of looking at this. It's not just a matter of getting a few psychologists on to say, well, you're okay, even though that's hugely important. I think we need to have some transparency around how I'm, inciting you to feel, and then just kind of letting you be.